For part 2 of this review of the causes of the Civil War, we are going to pick up at 1859, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Now, when we had last spoken of John Brown, he had killed several men in Kansas, he and his sons. He was forced to leave Kansas following this attack at the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre, and so he's going to travel east because he has a continuing plan to end slavery. Now, if you just look at this picture very quickly, look in his eyes, you can see that he is in fact someone who very firmly believes in what it is that he is doing, and his stated goal is to end slavery no matter what means, no matter what the cost. Well, Brown and a small group of his supporters planned an attack on Harper's Ferry. Specifically, there was an armory, a place where the United States government carries and prepares or holds their guns. Now, his goal is to break into this armory, steal guns, hand them out to enslaved Africans in the local area, and start a slave revolt. His overall goal is to have this revolt sweep across the South, killing all slave owners that is necessary to kill to end the institution of slavery. Now, Brown is not successful in his plan. He and his sons, as well as several other men, attack the armory. They do capture the armory, but locals alert the army, and a group of Union soldiers under the control of Colonel Robert E. Lee, who is later going to be the head of the Southern armies during the Civil War, are going to show up and stop Brown and his men. Now, Brown's sons are killed. The other men in this conspiracy are killed. Brown is wounded and captured. Now, Brown is put on trial for both murder and treason. He sits quietly during his trial. His defense is that the Bible requires that we feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and protect the weak. And he said, in trying to end slavery, that was my only intention, is to follow what the Bible commands. Now again, we have another amazing picture of Brown that gives you a sense of how committed he was to his cause. And during his trial, he says, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, I say let it be done. Brown does, in fact, give up his life. He is hanged on December 2nd, 1859. Now, the fact that this northern abolitionist is trying to incite a slave revolt is enough to already cause tension on our thermometer. The South is furious, but is actually made much worse by the fact that many Northerners view Brown as a hero. Church bells are rung throughout the North on the day of his execution as a means of honoring him. Now, to give you some perspective on what this would be like if today people in California were to honor someone like Osama bin Laden as a hero for the attacks that took place on the East Coast. It would infuriate people on the East Coast. It would seem very strange, very angering. This is how many Southerners felt about the North honoring John Brown for his part in this attempted slave revolt. Southerners are furious, and Southerners view this as only another sign that the North is trying to both destroy their way of life and destroy them. And so tensions go up very significantly between the North and the South. This leads us to the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. This is really the spark that sets off the war. Now, everyone could feel the tension building. It had been 40 years of tension building between the North and the South, arguments, fighting. There has now been violence ever since Kansas. Everyone knows that with the 1860 presidential elections, there's an air of expectancy. Everyone knows something is going to happen. Well, Lincoln has been a member of the Republican Party, which at that time their stated goal was the ending, or at least the stopping the spread of slavery. And so Lincoln, well, he gets the Republican nomination. The Democratic Party actually splits their votes. Now, you would think with more people running for office, that would mean more votes going to your party. Well, it might mean that, but if half of the country is Republican and half of the country is Democrat, when the Democrats run two different people for president, each man can only really likely gain about 25% of the vote. And so by splitting their tickets, Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas, Southern Democrats nominate John Breckinridge. The Democrats have almost ensured that they are going to lose this election. It's made even worse by the fact another man joins the presidential race on the Constitutional Union Party, which is meant to protect slavery and keep the country together. Now, if you look at our political cartoon, you can see that they are tearing the country to pieces, each trying to grab their own chunk. Well, what ends up with is a four-way split vote. Lincoln only receives 40% of the popular vote, which is more than any of the other people running, but it is not even half of the country. He does receive enough electoral votes. We've spoken about the Electoral College. He receives enough electoral votes to win the presidency, but that does not look good when he did not even get half of the votes for the country. Now, Southerners feel like their country's now being run by a man who hates their way of life, and Lincoln has said he does not like slavery. And so in South Carolina, it's the first state to secede. They leave the Union on December 20th, 1860. When Lincoln becomes president on March 4th, 1861, 7 states have already seceded. They've created their own country. They call it the Confederate States of America. They've written their own constitution, and they've elected their own president, Jefferson Davis. It sets the stage for the first shots of the war, which is 1861, the Battle of Fort Sumter. Now, when the southern states seceded, they took control of all federal buildings, and those could be military forts, post offices, lighthouses, government buildings. Really, it could be any building that was owned and operated by the federal government. They seized control of them, saying they are now part of the Confederate States of American government. Well, Fort Sumter was a small fort. It's located on a tiny island outside Charleston, South Carolina. Now, this fort's original intention was to protect the port from pirates, but it is filled with soldiers who are loyal to the United States of America under a man named Colonel Robert Anderson. Now, he refuses to turn over control of this fort to the Confederate government. He says he is a soldier operating under the control of the United States of American government. Well, this is infuriating to the Confederates, to the Southern government. Their goal is to remove these soldiers. Now, their first intention is to starve them out, make sure that simply to wait until they run out of food and they are forced to leave. Now, Lincoln wants to send troops to help these soldiers, but he fears that if he sends more troops, it will spark violence, military action, and it will only make things worse. His goal is still to bring the South back in peacefully, so he decides to send food instead. Well, he sends several ships. One ship is shot with cannons by the South. The second ship, before it can arrive, the South decides they are going to take the fort by force. On April 12, 1861, the Confederate government begins firing on Fort Sumter. And as you can see in the picture, it is not a very good day for Fort Sumter. The battle lasts for 34 hours. The Union soldiers inside the fort do surrender, but not until every building in Fort Sumter is either destroyed or on fire. Now, you would think with over 4,000 cannonballs being fired, the death toll on both sides would be pretty high. It is a bloodless battle. No one dies. As a result of Fort Sumter, we see the taking of sides. 7 states that originally seceded: South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. While after Fort Sumter, 4 additional states go to the Confederate States of America: Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. And with that, the war has officially begun. So please review your thermometers. We will discuss them in class. You'll have an opportunity to ask any further questions, and we'll have an activity in class to prepare us for the test. Thank you much.